What's up, everyone? King Krabs back again today, and I'm not alone. Again, I am joined by a good friend of mine, someone you might recognize on the channel, someone who I stream with a lot. It is none other than Plat. So if you'd like to say hello and introduce yourself.
Um, Hello, I am Platt. I have been on and off competitive since like Generation 5. I've only gotten good at it this generation, partly with help of King Krabs himself and just my own sheer stubborn determination of will. And I am a ghost type leader in addition to Alex's brain cell, who has to remind him that that ground resists poison.
That's something I'll never understand or never remember. I will continue to sludge bomb Landresses till the day I die, and then be
Right.
confused when it's not very effective. Um, So yeah, I guess a little bit about yourself. You mentioned there that you are a ghost gym leader. If you kind of want to expand on that, what league do you play for? What is a gym leader? How did you end up becoming ghost? Because a bit of background, I suppose, for the viewers here, that you were originally a fairy main, if I'm not mistaken.
Well, sort of. Like, I started this generation's competitive with my fairy team that is just so evil and so fun. That is fun to play, but like, A, before fairy existed, and just B, in general, I've considered myself kind of both a ghosted and just fairy main later on when I decided, like, no, I want to try some fairy and have fun with it. But it's been since like Generation 5 that I've kept trying to make a ghost type team that for to be a gym leader, and it's changed over the years as Ghost has gotten some really great mons to add. But like I'm currently a gym leader for the Venetia League, and I was actually going to be a fairy type leader for another league, but that didn't really work out. So I went there, and the thing about it was actually pretty funny. So like first I went over there and I was going to test to be the fairy gym trainer of their meta. And the thing is, I'm used to national dex monotype, but they were using regular monotype that isn't national dex. And I was so unprepared for that meta and just the changes that there were that I completely failed that test. And it was like, okay, dang, fair enough. I gotta start doing some like regular monotype and so I can actually be prepared. And what ended up happening is instead of retesting to be the fairy gym trainer, is I basically took 2 weeks with my determined little mindset. I made a ghost team. I play tested it. I made some adjustments, and in basically 2 weeks, I learned the regular monotype meta. And then I came back. I was like, "Hey, I want to test as the ghost gym leader," and I passed.
So that's I think it's really cool about being a ghost gym leader is I think ghost is a severely underpopular type. You are one
No,
of
it
the
really is.
very few dedicated Ghostmans I actually know, if not the only dedicated Ghostman I actually know. A lot of people have a pocket Ghost. A lot of people, highlighter players, play Ghost, which is kind of surprised me at the high level. It is actually played a few times, but I would say there's not many people dedicated to the type, unlike you, which is fantastic to have you here on the channel to discuss that. And you actually brought a team here today, which I have open here on the team builder. So in a few minutes, we're going to discuss that. Um, but before we do, I want to ask you, what are your thoughts overall on the type? Because playstyle wise, I think it's really interesting. I actually don't think it's completely dissimilar to Fairy in a weird way. They both have a lot of they have nice setup. They have weird tricks up their sleeve, as well as having a relatively spammable stab attack. But I suppose the main difference from my experience in Ghost is its HP stat sucks, so it's
Yes.
almost impossible to play it defensively. There is some defensive mons, like right here we see Course like Galler on the team, which we'll get into more detail later. But overall, as a type, it's really not defensive heavy, so it's hard to play. It's basically impossible to play balance in the type or in defensive at all. So, what are your thoughts on the general playstyle?
Yeah. You you are definitely correct that it is really hard to play this type defensively. Not because like there isn't potential for it to play, but like in part because of the HP stat, and just because Ghost doesn't really have a lot of defensive mons that are viable. Like it has like several that in theory could be viable, but like with the way the current meta is shaped up, they just kind of aren't. You know, like Palosan would be useful if it was useful. Dusclops and Dusknor could be useful, except they don't really seem to be. And even I really wish Driftblim was a more useful Pokemon because I think it's really interesting, but it just doesn't have everything to like back it up as what could be a useful defensive Pokemon. And even like Gourgeist would in theory be, I mean, some of the like random sets of Gourgeist you see in the random meadows are actually pretty neat. It makes you be like, huh, how come it doesn't work like regularly? I mean, I'm sure there's reasons for it, but like it has all the things there that it could have been a more defensive Pokemon. So instead, we're just kind of left with Corsola as their only real defensive option. And like as a result, it just feels like Ghost, just overall, the actual useful mons are all just really more offensively oriented. Like the main difference between Ghost and Fairy that I would say is just like the fact you can definitely play Fairy defensively, and it's got all that clerical support. You know, it's got Wish Passing, it's got just all the support it needs. But Ghost doesn't really have that, like, at all, to my knowledge. It's just kind of like, even just trying to counter status effects is kind of feels like you have to sacrifice something else just in order to have those kind of basic checks. And on top, there's not really much wish support or just in general team support that you can do between ghosts, and like, it's definitely not exactly gets to be as defensive and just hard to counter as Fairy. Because whenever I'm playing Fairy, it's like, I have so many fun mons in order to try and just counter everything, like Paraflinch Togekiss, that absolute demon of a Pokemon, is just especially because I run defensive Paraflinch Togekiss, and that thing can give a lot of Pokemon a run for their money and being the most pain in the butt thing you could ever deal with. And then there's like there's Sylveon or Comfey, you know, just great like special defensive support. Just wall something off and boost and just counter back, that sort of thing. But like with Ghosts, there's just nothing like that, like really anywhere.
Yeah.
At all.
Even looking at it now, it actually shocks me how bad the HP pools are. Like, we have Drifblim and Jellicent too, or, well, even Drifblim's 150. That's impressive. Jellicent's 100, which is okay. It's not like that impressive. It's a solid HP stat, but just below that, then like the majority, you're kind of around the 70, between 70 and 50, which is just awful. So even if you look at like Sableye, Mega Sableye with the 125, 115 SPDF, if it had any semblance of usable HP, it'd be so much better. Same with Dusknoir. Its base 45 HP it just basically makes its defensive stats completely null and void. Like, there's no point in having base 135 defense if you have base 45 HP. I know you can do like pain split shenanigans, which is kind of something I wish Ghost could do more of. But yeah, it just doesn't really work.
Yeah, I completely forgot to mention Jellicent and Sableye, but yeah, like Mega Sableye can be pretty useful if you play it right. I feel like Jellicent was more useful in previous generations when I used it, because being able to Scald Burn and Hex and like Water Absorb and all that kind of stuff combined together, it can be really annoying, and it can be a pretty decent, especially defensive mon. But now not really, especially with all the knockoff everywhere, and just and the way that Dark tends to be like more physical.
Yeah.
It just makes it not really quite as useful as it should be. So it's just like, yeah, if you want to use just like viable ghost Pokemon, like none of them are really defensive except some Aegislash sets. And even then, like Aegislash is usually defensive on Steel, not Ghost, because Ghost kind of needs its power.
Yes, definitely. But even on that note, we're talking about playstyles. It's probably one of the few types in Monotype that can semi-reliably run Trick Room in singles, which I think is pretty cool. I wouldn't say it's the main focus of Ghost or even the main playstyle, but I would say it's probably one of the only 3 or 4 types that can reliably run Trick Room if you want to go down that route. I was just looking at it here, there's some decently slow mons that pack a punch, like Alolan Marowak, especially with Thick Club, can do some serious hurt. Cursula is very slow and has an alarmingly high special attack. I didn't realize it had base 145. That's pretty high.
Work a thing and give it choice specs, and you're gonna have a real problem for the other team.
I think it also gets Meteor Beam, doesn't it? It does get Meteor Beam. So yeah, you could even run like White Herb, Meteor Beam, and Trick Room, Cursula, that kind of thing. So Ghost definitely has some interesting tools. I think maybe my thought on Ghost is it's by no means a bad type, but I feel like often the sum of its parts are don't add up, if that makes sense. Like, you know, it feels like all these tools should be being used, but it just falls short of actually being used, and instead it just relies on offensive power, which isn't necessarily about them by any stretch of the imagination. It's a completely respectable way to play a type. I think as well, to me, it also plays into the fact there's so little ghost types. It's the smallest type in the game,
Yep.
or is it ice? I think it's ghost, isn't it?
It's one of the two. I don't
I
remember.
think it might be ghost. There's just not many ghost types, and there's not a lot of ghost type secondary options. You kind of are running the same few secondary types over and over again.
Yeah, it's like, do you want some more interesting combinations? How about another fire ghost Pokemon?
Exactly, which I will actually want to ask you later about the Fire Ghost Pokemon because I know you're a big Chandelure fan, but we'll wait till we get to the team building aspect. There's a couple
Oh
of
yes,
Pokemon I specifically want to talk about before we jump into the teams. Your team is one Spectrier, and what are your thoughts on Spectrier? Because this thing is so divisive.
Yeah, I have maybe a bit of a hot take. I don't think on a monotype team specifically, Spectrier is that useful of a Pokemon. Like, in theory, it could be pretty neat and useful. Like, it's got great speed. If you choice scarf that thing, you're in for a world of hurt.
Hmm.
But it's essentially a Shadow Ball factory, is what I call it. Like, with a move pool as completely abysmal as that thing is, it's like, why would I want to have just like a Shadow Ball spamming Pokemon when I could have like something else that has more coverage? I feel like for monotype, like coverage is really important.
Yes.
And Spectre just like spamming Shadow Ball with like a nasty plotter substitute or Dark Pulse or whatever just isn't really useful on a ghost team, or at least like if you use it, you're probably sacrificing something else that I think is more valuable personally if you're building a monotype team.
Okay. I mean, I think it's fair to say this thing has a move puddle, not a move pool. I mean,
Yeah.
it's
Oh
actually
god, yeah.
pathetic how shallow its move pool is. Like you have Mud Shot, which is technically coverage, even though it's base 55, so it basically does not count. It's also not even
Yep.
100% accuracy, so that sucks. But you're right, it is just spamming Shadow Ball. That said, I do think against types that don't pack a dark or normal type, that can be quite overwhelming. Just because Grimnay is essentially, it's like basically a Beast Boost kind of clone, but for specific special attack. It's like a special attack Moxie. I don't know why I say Beast Boost.
Yeah, like, oh yeah, Spectre can be brutal. It's just, I don't think that like just having to set up the Shadow Ball factory pain game is really worth. It just sacrificing that just has less utility and usefulness overall. I was once asked to like test another team in Venetia to like switch Chandelure out for a Spectre to make it more fair because it was a grass type team, and so I named it Useless Horse.
Okay, I'm on the fence about Spectrier. I think ultimately I'm not a fan of it in the monotype tier just because I do think there are certain types that it just completely overwhelms, like maybe Bug, for example, or Fire, or something that doesn't have any answer to Ghost, like any normal or dark types. I guess you could use a special wall, but a lot of the time the Ghosts have a good mix of physical and special attackers, so I feel like any good Ghost player should be able to dispatch the opponent's special wall before dispatching Spectrier. But it's interesting to hear your perspective. And the second Pokemon I want to ask you about is not in the game as of yet, hopefully will be soon, is Hisuian Zoroark, and do you think it's going to be all that's cracked up to be on a Mono Ghost team if it comes into the tier?
I definitely think it's gonna get used like really hard. I don't remember like what exactly it can do besides be normal ghost, but like just knowing that it's normal ghost is like, oh, this thing's gonna definitely change ghost teams a lot.
Mm-hmm.
Like being it like a ghost type that's finally like immune to ghost moves, like that's gonna be really valuable for like a switch in, especially against other ghost teams.
Mm-hmm.
And so like and like Zoroark as a base Pokemon, since it's presumably going to keep the same stats, because the different forms always do, right?
I think it has the same stats, or is it slightly different? No, it's slightly different. It's actually, according
Oh,
to Showdown, it is more offensive. So it has 5 more
okay.
base speed and special attack, which is quite nice
Yeah,
actually. So it's even faster and stronger than base Zoroark. Like base 110
yeah,
speed,
that's gonna be all over the tier. It's gonna be all
base
over the tier.
base 110 speed is very respectable. You're hitting Lattie's speed tier, which is I think quite nice. And
Yeah.
125 special attack is pretty solid. I think you stick a specs on this thing, you could use Calm Mind, Agility even. Its move pool isn't terrible. It gets Flamethrower, obviously Shadow Ball. Actually, I lied. Its move pool is kind of terrible, but it gets Flamethrower, so that's kind of cool. Focus Blast as well, not terrible. Sludge Bomb, there's some okay options there. I think as well having Illusion could be very nice because you could think your opponent makes you think you're actually a ghost Pokemon, and then they fire a Shadow Ball like, ha, I'm actually immune. And now that's probably only the case against the Ghost Ditto, which is, in my opinion, a weird matchup because I think overall, I would say Ghost really doesn't have many losing matchups, but conversely, I really don't think it has a lot of super winning matchups either, if that makes sense.
I can't disagree.
Like, obviously it loses Dark pretty bad. It can beat Dark, though. There's plenty of Fairy and 5-hit moves it can
It
get.
definitely can. I have had some fun Dark wins, and that I'm very proud of. They're not like all the time, but they happen.
But it's not a completely unviable type. I think what makes Ghost so good in the top tier is that there is not one single type you cannot beat, and I think actually I will say there's one extra hard matchup. I think the normal matchup is so stacked in Normal's favor over Ghost, in my opinion. I just feel like, especially in Natex where you have Mega Lopunny who does not care about the Ghost types, as well as that Normal typically doesn't rely on its Normal stab, while Ghost often does. So I think for that reason Normal does have the advantage, but even then it's definitely far from unwinnable. And I guess the hardest matchup is Ghost versus Ghost, but that's both teams, so you know it kind of comes down to either who has the better built team or who has the advantage in the early game, or who can basically outplay their opponent. I don't know if I like or hate the Ghost versus Ghost matchup. It's a very interesting. What are your thoughts on it?
Personally, I love the Ghost versus Ghost matchup in like a love-hate kind of way, because it's like, oh boy, we are both possibly going to win here, and we're both got advantage. So it's like a high octane, just put the pedal down, rush into it, and see what the heck happens. It's like, and then if you like come out on top and you win, you can like joke that you're asserting your dominance or something like that, and just being like, yay, my Ghost team came out on top. But even if you lose, it's like it very much comes down to being able to like predict your opponent's sets and what they're gonna do, because you might both be using the same things on each other. You're almost guaranteed to be using it. Because like when you get up there, all Ghost teams start to become the same 6 Pokemon with like only a little bit of variation.
You might see like one or two different Pokemon being used at top level Ghost, but it's very much similar. That said, though, I will say a lot of Ghosts have a huge variety of moves they can run, which is probably where more Ghost variant shines more so than the Pokemon. You'll see the same kind of 8 Pokemon over and over again, but a lot of their sets can be different, which kind of wants me to bring me into the next point, which is your team. So I have this open in front of me. I'm not sure if you have it open, but it's fine if you don't. I'm going to run through it here, and I'm going to ask you some questions, starting with your Dragapult Lanner. So if you can kind of just run down the set, what brought you to this, because there's so many viable Dragapult sets, it's actually disgusting how good this Pokemon is.
Yeah, no kidding. This thing is a menace to society, and that's just a fact. Like, not as much of a menace as things like Celestelia, or my other mortal enemy, stuff like Excadrill, but it's definitely very vicious, and I love it for that. Some matches, like, this thing can be disgusting. If I can manage to get this thing to Dragon Dance like 2x or 2.5, the game is basically over.
Yeah, it's over. If you have a +3 Dragapult, the game's over. There is almost nothing living this.
No, this thing's like an absolute beast. So, there's definitely quite a few different ways to use Dragapult, right? Like, I've seen like specs, like special attack. I don't really get those stats, not gonna lie. I guess it's got some useful special attack coverage, but when you look at this like beast of an attack stat, I'm not really sure why you would do that when you have other special attack options.
I think definitely for monotype, there's no reason to run special attack Dragapult unless you kind of want the surprise factor.
Yeah. And even then, like, it's a Pokemon that doesn't have a lot of, like, defense of any kind, so the surprise factor is only gonna do so much.
True.
So, like, I think the thing that sticks out most is that I went max attack over max speed on this thing. And my reason behind that is that I want this thing to pack a bit more of an immediate punch. And like because like just one Dragon Dance boost can usually patch up the speed and make it so it's still faster than anything you could throw at it. So I'd rather have just more attack to like make sure that it can like hit things and bring them down, because this thing cannot take a lot of hits. And if this thing takes like more than like 3 hits at most of the time, it's down. And so it's definitely something where you have to play around it well and take advantage of openings to like bring it in and use Dragon Dance. Hope you don't get status effect and just kind of wreak havoc.
Yes.
So it's all definitely built around Dragon Dance and just how vicious it gets. If it gets even with like just one stack of Dragon Dance, this thing can like honestly tear through teams if a Pokemon's not too defensive is against it. And then of course, you know, Dragon Darts. Every Dragapult's gotta have Dragon Darts.
It's such a good move.
Incredibly useful move. Yeah, it's disgusting. I love it so much. But you know, pretty much speaks for itself. Just use it to wreak havoc. Phantom Force is just another really useful move that Dragapult has at its disposal. The disappearing turn 1 and the hitting break 2 through protection is just great, and it's the main reason that I decided to go for a leftovers build on this Dragapult. Because like because there could be Focus Sash, but since I have no way to get rid of like any rocks or anything else, the chances of Focus Sash doing its job are kind of lower. But if you can manage to get like multiple Phantom Forces off, then you can get a lot of leftovers recovery out of it, which could help you survive another hit. And that's really valuable on a thing this frail that needs all the boosting it can get to like wreak havoc. And then last we have Sucker Punch, which just is a really great so to speak surprise move, because especially against other ghosts, sending this thing out and just like smacking it with Sucker Punch before it can like use a priority move or just do anything to get faster. It's come in handy multiple times for sure to just have Sucker Punch and just smack on something. Plus, it's stronger than using Shadow Sneak, so
True.
yeah. Having like more than one there's quite a bit of priority on this team, but it's very essential to just kind of keep up with the opponent and stuff like that. So like put all that together, and if I can get this out in a good thing, this thing can like sometimes just absolutely destroy teams.
So yeah, I think that's one thing that's very important that you mentioned it there on Ghost. I think priority is super important because it's so frail.
Yeah.
If there's a revenge killer, you just want to smack that and kill it fast. If you have a +2 Shadow Sneak, or in this case maybe a +2 Sucker Punch, and you can just kill something before it can kill you back, that's amazing for Ghosts. So one thing I want to add on Phantom Force, the reason why I love Phantom Force as well, I feel a lot of types rely on turn-based strategies, be it screens, weather, all that kind of good stuff. So Phantom Force will actually also stall out a turn of your opponent's sun, hail, rain, light screen, reflect, all that kind of stuff, you know. So it's really nice as well because Ghost wants to have that offensive power, and if it can stall out your opponent's turn-based strategies, it's really, really solid.
Yeah, definitely. Sometimes that works in your favor, and sometimes it doesn't. But like when it does, it is very satisfying.
True. Now,
Phantom Force thing like immune to King's Shield, which is very useful.
Breaking Protect is so nice. But one question I have on the Dragapult: why did you choose to go for Curse Body? Because for me, it's always a struggle between Infiltrator and Clear Body. I don't think I would ever opt for Curse Body.
Yeah, that's the fun thing. You will notice if you look over the team that half of it has Cursed Body, and the reason for that is that I think that cheeky RNG on the Cursed Body has definitely turned some battles in my favor. Because here's the thing, remember how I said that Dragapult is just like all about being able to set up. So imagine if your Pokemon, on the other hand, uses a move that like does like maybe a little less than half damage, and it gets disabled, and they're forced to switch out or switch to another move that's not going to do as much damage. That's a free Dragon Dance turn for you.
Okay, yeah, very fair point. That's interesting. I'm not saying it's a bad strategy by any stretch. It's just not the one I would have thought to opt for. So it's really cool to hear different thought processes. I personally love Infiltrator. I think being like screens, never heard of him, or like, you know, substitute, I laugh. It's so satisfying. But Curse Body, especially because you said you have Curse Body on Corsola and Gengar as well. It's really good for stopping, because choice items are so strong in monotype. that being able
Yes.
to
Oh
essentially
yeah.
shut those down is crazy. Now there is tons of other sets that Dragapult can use. Like I've seen sub disable sets, I've seen specially offensive, I've seen banded, I've even seen like U-turn scarf.
I've definitely lost to a substitute one like more than once.
They're tough, but I think for Ghost, I do think Dragon Dance is the best. I think on Dragon there's a plethora of other things you can run because basically every dragon ever can Dragon Dance. So Dragapult isn't
Hmm.
special, but on Ghost it is quite special that it can do that. And I don't think it's special it can sub disable because all Ghosts can do that. So I think on the Ghost side, Dragon Dance, in my opinion, is definitely the best set for Ghost.
I think that's part of the charm of ghost types in general, is that if you put any of these Pokemon that have dual type and on any other type, they wouldn't be like as needed or as special, and there would probably be alternatives to them. Like you don't necessarily need to use Dragapult on Dragon. I mean, you probably should use Aegislash on Steel, but I
Mhm.
guess you don't completely have to. You wouldn't be using. You don't necessarily need Blaze on like Fire, though you probably should. And like Poison doesn't really need Gengar, Fairy doesn't need Mimikyu, but
Mhm.
like Ghost needs all of these
Yeah,
Pokemon for the most
which
part
is a
because
very good point.
yeah, like all your subtypings are way more valuable to Ghosts than they ever will be to the other type you could be on, and I think
Definitely.
that's kind of charming.
So next we have, if I mispronounce any of these names, please let me know. We have Eragast, who is your Aegislash. So if you kind of want to run us through this Aegislash again, Aegislash is another mon that just has so many
Everything.
sets. It can do. You have Air Balloon. I've seen Leftovers, Weakness Policy. I've seen Lum. I've seen Substitute, Toxic. I've seen
Yes,
Specs. I've seen
yes.
Band. I've seen Life Orb. I've Shadow Tag. I'm actually a big fan of Shadow Tag personally on Steel, not so much on Ghost. But there's just this thing is almost endless.
Yeah, and I've been a fan of Aegislash ever since it came into the game. Like I remember in earlier metas where it kept getting banned and I couldn't enjoy it for very long, but now like power levels have finally evened out so that Aegislash isn't really overpowered anymore. Like it's still a vicious threat, don't get me wrong, but I never thought this thing was particularly overpowered because there's quite a few ways you can stop this thing, um, really nicely.
I
But
will. I,
like,
I. I think personally, I think in old generations, I would say it's busted. I think the extra 20 base stats it had
yeah,
was crazy.
definitely in Gen 6 it was busted, I'll give
Yeah,
it that.
and 7 in my opinion. And King Shield used to drop by 2 stages, not one. I think the
Oh my
massive
god.
nerf it's seen to this generation still makes it completely viable, but it's almost better for it because now it's so okay that it's fine in most tiers. King Shield be only 1 stage and -10 defense and special defense was much needed to balance it slightly. Sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt you. If you want to continue there talking about Aegislash.
Yeah. that's, that's on that subject, I remember like while I was getting ready to do this like ghost team, learn the meta in 2 weeks, then they're like, hey, we might ban Aegislash from monotype. Didn't you want us to ban Steel? And it's like, no, please don't ban Aegislash. You can pick on any other Steel type.
Yeah.
And so I was really when they voted that it wasn't going to be banned because this team would suffer just so badly if it didn't have Aegislash. And like Ghost just needs this Pokemon. I'm sorry,
Mhm.
there's no negotiating that.
Oh, I completely agree. I think, honestly, I think we should petition for single type bans, but that's a story for another day. But yeah, no, I agree. I thought the idea of banning Aegislash was honestly a waste of time. I don't even think it's the main reason Steel's broken. I don't think Aegislash is the cornerstone of Steel, and I think it would just be unnecessarily nerfing Ghost, which it didn't need. But if you want to run through the set as well, so you have a max attack adamant here, and you chose Air Balloon. Can you explain your rationale as to why you chose Air Balloon?
I was on leftovers originally because I was thinking like combining with King Shield, a little bit of leftovers recovery can help this thing survive some hits. And ultimately, it's still a question of a toss-up between their advantages and disadvantages to it. But like I've gotten into so many matchups where I sent this thing out, and the other Pokemon tries to use Earthquake, and it's like, well, I don't really have an answer to that. If I could
Hmm.
like just have one turn where I force them to use something else to pop the air balloon, then I could fire back with Sacred Sword and deal with it myself. So I just eventually decided to switch to air balloon to see if I could just get that one up and just get all these Earthquakers to be forced to use something else to break the air balloon so that I can fire back at them. Because just having one turn of, like, not having to deal with Earthquake on this Pokemon is very valuable, because, like, Earthquake being it to Aegislash is, like, I don't know, water to the clouds. Like, it will happen, and it's always going to happen.
I mean, Earthquake is probably one of the most if not the most used attack in the tier, in the game, to be honest. Singles, Earthquake is everywhere, so that's very reasonable. If you want to run us through a Sacred Sword as well, I think it's an amazing attack. It's so cool that I got this. So it ignores the target stat changes or defensive stat changes for anyone watching who doesn't understand what it does. And if you want to give a quick explanation as to why this is so good.
Yeah, I've seen some people run close combat on Aegislash, and I'm not gonna lie, I don't really get it. I feel like Sacred Sword, while it has less power, the stat change thing just makes it so valuable that it's like, why? And also, like, it fits the sword theme, which is a nice bonus, but, like, just that stat change thing is so valuable that's like, why would you want to, like, have defense drop, especially on a Pokemon that like, switches its attack and defense stats, when you could just have Sacred Sword. So, like, to explain it, what that means is that if you got a Pokemon that wants to think it can survive Aegislash better and wants to boost its defense, say there's an Iron defense on you, and it's a Steel type for added bonus, because we can always make fun of Steel a little bit. But if they think that they can, like, wall Aegislash by using their Iron defense or whatever, no, they can't. Sacred Sword doesn't care. It's gonna attack as if those stat changes didn't happen at all, and the Pokemon's still gonna take a lot of damage, especially if you got a Sword stance or two off. So yeah, I think Sacred Sword is great, and considering the amount of things that Sacred Sword is useful against on this thing, Tyranitar, Excadrill, just any Dark type that's gonna try to get to it.
Normal
Sacred
types
Sword
as well.
Heck, normal types definitely, Chansey and Blissey especially. Weavile, if you can manage to survive a hit from it, and stuff like that. Like, Sacred Sword just has so many practical uses to get a one-up on your opponents.
And then finally we have Shadow Sneak, which doesn't need too much explaining. It's just we all explained how good Priority was earlier, and as well that it stabs, so it's just a pretty solid thing to have. As well as that, which is really nice about Aegislash, you can, like, hide behind King Shield and then Shadow Sneak afterwards, it's pretty solid.
Yeah, you gotta be confident that you can either A, take a hit, or B, like, destroy something with Shadow Sneak when you use it. But I think having a combination of King Shield, Shadow Sneak, and then Sacred Sword, if you need to have a hit that goes second and doesn't go first, like, gives us some maneuverability to play around with its switching attack and defenses in order to do what best it can to take out the other opponent. And I've used basically the same set on Aegislash ever since it became a thing, and I haven't really changed it because I still like it.
Okay, that's very reasonable, honestly. If it ain't broke, don't fix it. Speaking of ain't broke, or potentially maybe being broke, let's talk about Blair or Corsolas. So I remember when this thing got announced, I thought its design was absolutely peak. And
yes.
I did not realize it was actually going to be a complete menace. So if you're looking at this and you think we're like joking, we're not. This thing is so incredibly hard to break. And I know this is one of your favorite Pokemon, so if you want to take it away as to why it's so incredibly hard to break, we could talk for a while about this one.
Oh yes, I love this thing so much. First of all, I agree that I absolutely love its design, especially someone who, like, used to run an ocean conservation blog when I was young and, like, still really cares about the state of the ocean. The fact that Game Freak made a bit of a statement and made a dying coral Pokemon to remind us that, yeah, the coral is out there and dying is just a great move. And also it's a really cute, sad dying coral, which is not something I thought I would ever say, but it's true. So yeah, this thing's a menace to society and any physical wall in existence, and I absolutely love it for it, because, you know, it is the one defensive Pokemon that Ghost really has to use. So, like, this thing, God, I love it so much. So we, like, give it max HP, of course, because we need to, and we give it max defense so that it's all the way it can, and then you double that with the Eviolite, and what you get is a ridiculous amount of defense. Which means that the only thing that can really stop this thing besides Toxic is knockoff, which is unfortunately really common. But sometimes, even if this thing gets knocked off, you can still play around it to still end up crippling all those sphere special, not special physical attackers on the other team. So like, you got Strength Sap, which is great if something thinks it's gonna boost in front of you, and that thing isn't a B-sharp, because that thing's a whole nother problem. But Strength Sap will like drain the other Pokemon of like one stage of attack, and then restore the HP to Corsola accordingly, which just stops so many special physical attackers in their wake. And on top of that, you Will-O-Wisp, so that you can also burn them and limit their ability to do any kind of useful damage. And so between Strength Sap and Will-O-Wisp, you're always deciding, like, which one do I use first, is best to use first to cripple this and then still survive afterwards, if survival is your priority in that case. And then you got Nightshade, so that it can do any kind of damage, because this thing just doesn't really have an attack stat. It just doesn't. So it needs Nightshade. And then, of course, Stealth Rock, you gotta get your rocks down, you know, because... I mean, I don't really need to explain that at this point, but...
And what I think is especially good about Rocks on Ghost is it blocks all spinning attempts, so you just cannot spin against Rock. So if you're one of the unfortunate types who doesn't run Defog, who runs Spin, so Bug, Ice, and Fire usually are the three big ones that come to my head, that they all rely on Spin as opposed to Defog, they hate fighting Ghost, because if you get your Rocks down, they are there to stay.
Yep, it was great. And then on top of this, you have Cursed Body, which we've already talked about, but put this with Corsola, and this thing becomes even harder to just kill in any capacity. So, like I said, the only thing that can really stop this is, like, knock off a really powerful physical attacker or a special attacker. So, like, I have sometimes seen teams that don't really have a special attacker or answer to this thing just get completely walled by it. Like, I once fought this ground team that didn't really have a special attacker at all, or if they did, I dispatched it quickly with something else, and I just watched them send out Pokemon after Pokemon trying to hit this thing, and I would just burn them and strength sap them in a never-ending cycle until they forfeited.
Yeah, against any rock weak team or any physically heavy team, this thing is honestly almost unbreakable. Now, it can lose pretty bad to sub as well. I've seen, like, high HP sub mons. This thing is essentially useless, but they're few and far between. They do exist, but it's not too often. Now, this thing is such a monstrously good physically defensive Pokemon. I will say one of the main problems I find on Ghost is it doesn't have any good special attacks, really, outside of Jellicent, but as you said earlier, Jellicent was kind of better in previous generations. I think it has its uses this generations. I've seen it been very good, but it's definitely not a staple of modern Ghost.
And the other thing is, Jellicent's already got, like, things to get off physical attackers. It's got Will-O-Wisp, it's got Strength Sap. So but its defense is still too low to really, like, be able to survive that stuff very well. And then
exactly.
You get anything with Thunderbolt in there, and Jellicent's toast.
So next up we have your favorite Pokemon, if I'm not mistaken.
Yeah.
It's
Still is. Always will be.
Flicker the Chandelure. So this one is one I definitely want to talk about. Is Chandelure on the team completely favoritism bias, or do you actually prefer this over Blacephalon and Marowak? Though granted, Marowak is very, very different. It's very different stratosphere fire go to. It's a Trick Room offensive Pokemon. It does not play the same role of Choice Scarf offensive that Chandelure and Blacephalon can.
Yeah, here's the thing about it. Is there favoritism bias? Absolutely. And also, this is just the same basic Chandelure set that I've run for generations and I'm used to. But there is a couple things that Chandelure has over Blacephalon that I think makes it a little bit... First of all, it has a little bit more utility and, like, coverage than Blacephalon does, which is already a point in its favor. But especially though, the main thing, and I would like put like glowing arrows next to this so that you get the point, is Energy Ball. Energy Ball by itself makes just gives Blacephalon a run for its money. And because like sometimes in like the ground matchup or the water matchup, I have won battles just because I had Energy Ball. And Energy Ball is just so valuable to have on a fire type because like it can fire back at anything that it's weak to.
Yes.
So and Blaze can't really do that. And beyond that, every other move it has in here, Blaze can also do. But just having Energy Ball alone, like, can really put some matchups in your favor. And of course, to add to that, we have to choice Scarfit so that this thing's like useful. Because I don't really think you can do much of any other Chandelure set there well without making it really speedy. And yeah, it has less special attack than Blaze and less speed and just pretty much everything less. But at the same time, sometimes I've found Flash Fire can be a useful ability to have instead of Beast Boost because sometimes, well, first of all, there's a switch out potential, especially with AG Slash. I've definitely like baited like a heat wave on Zapdos and switched into Chandelure and absorbed it and gotten powerful and just fired back.
This thing is strong with a flame Flash Fire.
Oh yeah, but sometimes it's serious. I remember I had one battle where like it was down to just Chandelure and a Dragonite, and Chandelure didn't have much HP left. And the Dragonite tried to finish it off with a Fire Punch, and it got Flash Fired, and it didn't die. But like, if that had been Blaze, Blaze would have died, because Blaze has no defense. And that's another thing about it, is compare Blaze's defenses that don't exist to Chandelure's like respectable 90 and 90, and this thing can take a hit or two. I think the most Chad moment I've had of like Chandelure over Blaze besides that Fire Punch was this time that an Aegislash tried to Shadow Sneak it and it lived and it Shadow Balled it back and it died. And Blaze could not have taken that hit because Blaze can't take a hit. But Chandelure can take a hit or two and still be alive and fire back at something, which can be valuable in a lot of matchups. So yeah, there's criticism, but also I just like to sing and I refuse to acknowledge that Blaze exists.
Fair, I understand that. I don't like Blaze's design that much personally, so I can understand that. But my one question is, why did you opt for something like Psychic over Trick?
Well, first, because I don't want to get rid of the Scarf, honestly, in most situations. But also, Psychic comes in handy a lot, like Nidoking, Nidoqueen, Toxicroak, well, not Gengar because you would just Shadow Ball it, but like there's a lot of poison or sometimes even fighting types that can get brought down with a Chandelure Psychic very well.
Okay, makes sense. And then next up, because we are making fun of Blacephalon, we might as well, or we can say we're clowning on Blacephalon if you will. We might as well clown on the best or worst, depending on your respective Fire Ghost Pokemon, Alolan Marowak. So, what's your thoughts on Alolan Marowak? Because I've been practicing Ghost the last couple of days. It's actually the 1st of October now when we're recording this video, or 2nd now because it's past midnight for me. So we decided obviously it's a good kind of Halloween month video to do. But I've been practicing Ghost in the meantime, and I've been trying to run Alolan Marowak, and that thing is just such a mega disappointment. It's like it's almost exactly what you want, but it just seems to fall short. Like I swear it does 99% to every single Pokemon ever. Never 100%. It never one hit kills things. It's always like, I'm gonna leave you live. And then as well as that, Poltergeist, I remember I messaged you on Discord earlier yesterday saying like, I hate Poltergeist so much it missed 4 times in a row because it's 90 accuracy. It just equates to 0 accuracy. So, what's your thoughts on Alolan Marowak? And it's also definitely a thing that can't necessarily be run on traditional Ghost. I think it kind of needs Trick Room to be run.
Yeah, agreed. First of all, I'm glad that you had the sequel to the time that Toxic missed 9 times that you once mentioned.
That was a stream, yeah. I did that. That was my very first stream.
Because missing 4 times with 90% accurate is pretty bad. Your luck scares me sometimes. Alright, but yeah, I don't really see how you could run a Alolan Marowak on traditional Ghosts. I mean, like, unless you can, even if you try to flame charged it, like, that thing has way too many turns of setup that it's gonna get, unless you, like, somehow trap the opponent in, that thing's gonna get obliterated one way or another. So, like, I can only see that thing working on a Trick Room Ghost. Just plain and simple.
That's very fair. Just wanted to kind of get your thoughts on that because we're discussing the other Ghostfire, and I know you're a big Chandelure fan, which is fair to be honest. It's probably a top 5 Gen 5 design for me. I use it in my black and white game, and I really liked it, and it's honestly probably top 3 for Gen 5 Pokemon for me. It's a really, really solid Pokemon design.
I remember when he used to have Shadow Tag, and that got taken off because it became way too overpowered for anything, which fair enough.
That's very reasonable.
Back in the day, this thing was a menace to society, and I loved it. But even though it's less a menace to society, I still love it. And like, it's definitely the best object Pokemon design that exists in this game, and that's just an objective fact. Considering like how it's like among the top 100 most favorite Pokemon of everybody,
True.
like I think that's a fair thing to say.
It also got into Pokken, which is bizarre but cool. But
Oh, I remember playing it with my dad and like exclusively playing Chandelure because like why would you be anything else? Look at this thing, so cute. It can burn your soul, um, and just I can't explain without going into a long rant about why I love this Pokemon so much. But just like it's like the perfect Gothic Pokemon, and that's a lot to say because Gothitelle exists, but it really
true.
is just like the perfect Gothic look Pokemon, and just perfectly Halloweeny as well. I think the only Pokemon that's more Halloweeny than this thing, besides Mimikyu, is like Pumpkaboo and Gourgeist. But it's just such a pleasing design in every aspect,
Mm.
and boys can't say that.
So before we become a Chandelure fan club video, let's move on to
Yep.
Gengar, which is a personal favorite Pokemon of mine, and that's probably showing my age because I did grow up with Generation One. For those who don't know, my very first Pokemon game, I think actually one of my very first games at all were Pokemon Red and Blue. So I've always been a big Gengar fan or a Ghastly's line fan. So if you want to kind of run through the Gengar and describe what this thing does, I actually just looking at the set, I love this. I think Specs Gengar is super strong and hits like a truck. But if you want to go through that,
I know the main other option people like to run is Choice Scarf, which is also valid, but I really like the raw power of Choice Specs, and I'm willing to like deal with being only 350 speed against some faster Pokemon because of all the priority I have, and just the fact that I have some faster Pokemon on the team to compensate. So, but like, um, yeah, I think I was originally like Substitute. I tried out Substitute Gengar, which I've used in the past, but it didn't really work as well as I wanted it to. So I kind of switched over to just let's just put on Choice Specs and give it some extra power, because that comes in handy a lot with this set. Like Thunderbolt with Choice Specs is really good for a lot of water types. Looking at you, Toxapex, you menace to society. um, and let's see, like Mantine, of course, is gonna die immediately,
hmm
and just some flying types definitely need a Thunderbolt to humble them out. And you know you got Shadow Ball Choice X Gengar hits really hard, and and whenever I can get that off against a slower opponent, that works quite well in the favor. Focus Blast is what you pick if you want to play risky in the Wild West, because okay, it is Focus Miss, and if you miss Focus Blast, the other thing is probably like a Dark type or Steel or something that's probably gonna kill you in return. So like
yes.
we use Focus Blast if we're gonna spin the roulette wheel and see if we're gonna get some ground or not. And of course, Sludge Wave, great for a lot of fairy types, especially like Tapu Fini. Tapu Fini can't really stand up to this thing with Sludge Wave unless it can scald it like a couple times. And you know, just pretty much most fairy types you can think of. Sludge Wave's great for that. And of course, you know, Grass goes as well, but you know, you got other answers to Grass if needed. And yeah, Sludge Wave just hits really nice for all that power, and you know, like the small poison chances sometimes comes in handy a little bit. And like now that this thing's got Cursed Body and they took away its Levitate, I really wish it still had Levitate because
Yeah.
switching into a ground type on this team is a nightmare. Um, and it would be great if I could just switch into Levitate and be cheeky, but instead I have to settle for stacking the Cursed Body chances and seeing if I can turn something in his favor if it gets disabled on the other side, because sometimes that still works in your favor, but I would probably pick Levitate over that.
I would too. It's a shame it doesn't have like the option of levitate. That was actually one of my questions. Would be, what's your thoughts on losing levitate? I think most Gengar fans are disappointed at lost it. Like Curse Body's not bad. It's not like it got a terrible ability. It's still a solid ability, and some would argue it's even better. Though I definitely do miss levitate, especially as a poison player. I really miss levitate.
Yep.
So last, of course, not least, we have Mimikyu. Mimikyu is it's a strange Pokemon. Like I think the initial hype behind Mimikyu was not met in traditional 1v1 formats. Though I think that's not the case for Monotype, and I think in Monotype Mimikyu is a really, really, really solid mon. Um, I love the fact it gets Drain Punch, which of course that you discuss in a while, and as well as that, just generally it's good coverage. Its stats are reasonable, but where it truly, truly shines is its ability to disguise. So if you want to take us and give us a run through your Mimikyu setup.
Yeah, Mimikyu is one of those Pokemon that, like, for Ghost, like I said, it's not essential for Fairy, but for Ghost, you need Mimikyu, you just do. Because, like, that extra hit it is just really extremely valuable, especially on a team that can't take a lot of hits and can't take a lot of switches. Like this one, because, again, Ghost just doesn't want to be defensive anymore. But when you have being able to take an extra hit means you could like take it, you could either take for something else what would have killed something and try to hit back. You can use it to Swords Dance and get the advantage so you can hit back hard, or just things like that, right? So like, yeah, Disguise is just an extremely valuable ability. You have to think wisely about how you use it and see, and you can't blow it. But Disguise can really help this thing. Because, like, Mimikyu's got pretty decent special defense, but it can't really take a physical hit that well, ever. So, like, it definitely needs Disguise, especially against a physical attacker, to stand a chance. And on that note, especially valuable is, like, also, I forgot to mention its typing. Being neutral to Dark-type moves is very valuable on a Ghost team, and combine that with Play Rough and Drain Punch, and if you play it right, it can definitely, like, get the edge off on some dark teams, especially in just dark Pokemon in general, and some dragon Pokemon. This thing is, Hydreigon's nemesis, and I use that to its advantage, because, you send out this thing against Hydreigon, it's like, oh, you think you can defeat me? Well, maybe if you got Flash Cannon, but if you don't, that Play Rough is gonna kill you in one hit if it doesn't miss.
Also, it absolutely drops Chansey and Blissey, especially after a Swords Dance. You Drain Punch it, like, yes, I'll take all my HP back and drop a big threat as well, so it's really nice. Also, I think it's probably one of Ghost's best Ditto answers, because if it copies it, for those who don't know, Ditto, I think Disguise only works if the Pokemon is called Mimikyu. It is Mimikyu only here. What that means is the Pokemon has to be Mimikyu, so even if Ditto copies this, or you trace the ability, it does not work unless you are the original Mimikyu user. Therefore, a Shadow Sneak can still 1-hit KO the opposing Ditto, which is pretty big because it can be a tough Pokemon for Ghost to take care of.
Yeah, I didn't even think about that, but that's a good point. Yeah, I imagine they code it that way because, like, nothing else will physically change, like, its sprite, like Mimikyu does when Disguise is down, so, like, it wouldn't really make sense. Though, like, in the game, it's always been, like, really, like, an acutely satisfying to watch it just, like, droop right over. I don't know, it's just kind of cute.
And Pokemon is so cute. Finally, your item is Life Orb. Can you just kind of give a run on why Life Orb? I personally use Life Orb too. I think it needs a bit of oomph. But what's your thoughts?
Yeah, like, definitely, this is a pretty standard, straightforward Mimikyu set. I think most variants of Mimikyu, the only thing I really see different is some people use Shadow Claw over Shadow Sneak, which, like, fair, it's got more power. But, harkening back to the priority, especially, on some Pokemon, where it just needs to be faster, because this thing's, like, a little bit fast, but it's not fast enough for a lot of things. So, like, you need the priority of Shadow Sneak in a lot of situations to, get this thing to do its best.
Also, I'd argue it's not strong enough either before Swords Dance and Life Orb, so it needs that tiny bit of help.
Yeah, like, Mimikyu, I mean, like, what's its base attack? Yeah, 279. This thing just isn't powerful enough without a Life Orb that, like, you kind of have to take that chance, you know? Like, if you Sword Dance this thing with Life Orb, it becomes, really a menace to society, but, like, without either or, like, this thing, it's just not powerful enough to do anything. So, like, yeah, you gotta Life Orb this thing, and, play accordingly. And that's where Drain Punch comes in handy if you can get it to set up, because, like, it'll help negate the Life Orb, taking everything from you.
So I've seen some people ask as well, would you run an Adamant Mimikyu? And I guess to answer that now that they're here, the only reason I would suggest against Adamant Mimikyu, because it is nice to get that extra bit of oomph behind its attacks, but if you lose the speed tie to an opposing Mimikyu in the Ghost matchup, you can lose the entire game. Like, you know, oftentimes I feel like the end game of a Ghost versus Ghost comes down to who's played their Mimikyu better. And if you lose a speed tie, or in the case of being Adamant, throw away the even chance of having a speed tie. If you just give your opponent the faster Mimikyu, you're probably going to lose the Ghost matchup.
also just I don't think this thing really functions being any slower than it is.
True. It does
It's like
outspeed 317 mons, like 95 base mons, which is a good chunk of kind of of important Pokemon. And with Adamant as well, you wouldn't outspeed things like Excadrill as well, which is not good. You want to outspeed Excadrill.
yeah, because that thing's gonna Iron Head you and you're gonna die.
Yeah, because of Mold Breaker, so you want to outspeed Excadrill.
Yeah. So yeah, because you can get if you get a Drain Punch off an Excadrill, it's probably gonna die, but you got to be able to do it first.
So that is the team, a really fun team, and clearly one that you put on so much thought and effort into, which I love to see. So before we're going to wrap up the video probably soon enough, but I do want to ask a couple of questions before we do about Ghost and kind of your thoughts on it. So first of all, Ghost is extremely comparable to Dark as a type. What's your thoughts on that? Do you think there should be more differentiation between them from Game Freak's end, or do you think, I know their playstyles are very different, but their matchups are fairly similar, so kind of what's your thoughts on that?
Are we talking about just competitively, or like as an aesthetic and as a type?
Competitively, like they both have the same, like they're both super effective on the same things. I know they have a defensively different matchup, but arguably Dark is more spammable than Shadow Ball. Like if I was to choose between choosing covered Dark Pulse and covered Shadow Ball, I'd probably usually go for Dark Pulse.
I mean, I would just say that Dark has more with it compared to Ghost. Like, it's one of the top like offensive types, just because it's got so many like big offensive Pokemon to its name, and it's also got more defensive Pokemon. You know, it's got Volibeye. Like,
True.
That alone, and then you got Tyranitar on top of that, and it's like Dark can be way more balanced than Ghost can. And it can also be extremely hyper offensive if you want to go that way. And like, and of course, the other thing is, if you want to be Dark, is like you're still trading off like whatever advantages it has to get stopped by fighting in Fairy more often than not. So like, it's just kind of down to, I mean, is that the thing you want to do with, or is it not? Because like we said earlier, Ghosts have a lot of losing matchups, so I wouldn't really say they're too similar, honestly. Like. Okay. They got their pros, they got their cons, but they kind of have overall a different bit of a different vibe.
Yeah, okay, that's very good point. Which brings me to my next point. Theoretically, you were able to change the Ghost type. What would you do? Like you can add a super effective, you can add a resistance, you can maybe add a new move, or even like theoretically add a new mon of a specific type or role. Like if I said to you, you have the power to make one change to Ghost, what would you do?
Just one? Man, I feel like, I mean, it would be a tie between just like improve the HP stats, give it a nice defensive mon, maybe give it just another valuable type pairing to use to its advantage, or man, when it comes to changing, does it need a weakness or something to be weak against? Like looking at the type chart, I'm not sure logically what it could resist, but I wouldn't mind if it had like one more resistance or one more thing was super effective against.
Let me ask you a difficult question, because this is like choosing your favorite between two best friends. You know, would you be happy if theoretically Ghost was super effective on Fairy?
Yeah, I mean, like, you know, if I were thinking about like my Fairy team and having to deal with Ghost, I would still try to be able to deal with it, but. I mean, but let's be honest, like, Fairy's weaknesses, they really, really, really are a weakness. But even if Fairy was super effective to Ghost, I still feel there would be enough, like, meandering in the matchup that Fairy would still have a chance to win if they're good enough. So, like, I think I wouldn't mind that, honestly. Except that it would make Mimikyu, hurt a lot more.
True.
That would be the one problem.
And then finally, my final question before we wrap it up is, what are your hopes going forward for Generation 9 for the Ghost type? What kind of do you hope to get? Do you hope we get any specific type combinations, any mons you'd like to see, or just generally what your kind of hopes are for the Ghost type going forward? Any returning mons, any bans, any changes?
It would be nice if they didn't add yet another Fire Ghost type. That would be a start. Not that I think the thing's design is like fine, but it's like, did we really need a fourth one? Not really.
Is there two more or is there one more? I can't remember.
There's two more.
Two more, yeah.
What are you doing? Like, we don't need that many.
Yeah.
Like, it's a cool type combination. I get it, but like, if you're gonna add more, then please add just more of like anything else. Just give us more ghost fairy, steel, just really anything like water. I think another ghost water. Well, I guess we have the new what was it, Basque Legion or whatever.
Yes.
If that thing's useful, then be my guest. We need something like that.
Okay.
And just like, really, because one of the reasons I stick by this type, besides the fact that I just love Chandelure, is just that ghost Pokemon are like, just like really so unique, right? Because like, I always feel like they're adding something interesting when they're dual type to their base type. Like, it's like you could have like a regular dragon, or you could have this scary ghost dragon that might be based on like both a fighter gen and some extinct something or whatever. It's like you could have like just a cool ghost, or you could have a scary haunted, you could possess ghost and stuff like that. Cursed sword, or you could have another Pikachu clone, or you could have something that's trying to be Pikachu because it wants to be loved. And just things like that. And think about stuff like Frostlass, just like I forget what the term is for what she is, but like just that old spirit of like a woman who dies in a blizzard and comes back. It's just like It's just so unique and interesting what you can do with ghost types. And also their dex entries are nightmare fuel, which is even more cool stuff to add to it. I never went through a goth phase or edgy phase, yet I still have just such an appreciation for horror, which doesn't help. But still, like, just Ghost adds so much, like, so much interesting things to whatever it's being added to. So it's just like, just give us more, like, just like dual type ghosts that are with interesting ideas, and if you're gonna continue to do singles, that's great too, because there's still so many neat like legends and ideas that you could do with ghosts. And you know what? Give it Miss Magius fairy type. I'm gonna say that. Make it a ghost fairy.
Honestly, yeah, that one really upsets me being Irish. Yeah. Obviously, Miss Magius is based on the Banshee, which literally is fairy woman in Irish. Banshee in the Irish language means fairy woman, and in Irish folklore, the Banshee is considered a fairy or a fae. So I completely agree. I think Miss Magius should have been fairy type, and it really upsets me that she's not. But thank you for getting me on that point.
Yeah, so like, just give her a fairy type, she deserves it. And like, besides that, I mean, just keep making some really, like, neat and interesting ghost types with different interesting combinations. Can we get, like, a ghost grass Pokemon that's, like, viably useful? Because that would be nice. Because, like, Trevenant and Gourgeist are great Pokemon on a creative spectrum. They look really cool. But, if we could get another one that looks really cool that could be useful, that would be great. It just would. Like, fire and like a ghost and electric too. Like, I mean, base Rotom's not really that useful, so like we need more electric ghosts.
True. Okay, so you have been absolutely more than knowledgeable and cooperative tonight, so I must thank you for that. It's been super interesting talking to you because I said ghost earlier. It's a very unheard of type in the fact that not many players would specialize it or even know it as in depth as you do. So it's been super fantastic to get to be able to chat to you today. Is there? I know recently you've been working on a horror podcast as well. Is that something you want me to plug here?
If you want to.
Well, I mean it's kind of ghost related, so I will link that down below in the description. Hopefully, if you have a link to it, definitely send it my way. I will link it down below in the description for viewers if you're interested.